The geopolitical landscape of the Middle East has reached a terminal point of escalation. As of 0800 GMT on Tuesday, April 7th, 2026, the Islamic Republic of Iran and the State of Israel are locked in a high-intensity kinetic exchange that threatens to dismantle the modern industrial framework of the Iranian state. This escalation occurs against the backdrop of a definitive ultimatum issued by US President Donald Trump, who has signaled a shift from maximum pressure to maximum destruction. The global energy market remains in a state of paralysis as the Strait of Hormuz, the world's primary oil artery, remains under an Iranian blockade, pushing Brent crude to 111.53 cents and WTI to 113.31 per barrel. In a series of statements that have bypassed traditional diplomatic protocols, President Trump has laid out a scorched earth policy for the coming 36 hours. Speaking from the White House late Monday, the president declared that the Iranian state stands on the precipice of total erasure. The entire country could be wiped out in one night, and that night could be tomorrow night, Trump stated, establishing a deadline of midnight Wednesday EDT, 0400 GMT Thursday. The specificity of the threat targets the very sinews of Iranian sovereignty. The president vowed that if Tehran does not capitulate to US demands, primarily the permanent cessation of its nuclear program and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, every bridge in Iran will be destroyed and every power plant in Iran will stop, will blow up, will explode, and will never be used again. This represents a transition from targeting military assets to a policy of systemic de-civilization through infrastructure erasure. On the ground, the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, have already initiated the preliminary phases of this systematic dismantling. Early Tuesday morning, the IDF confirmed the completion of a targeted wave of airstrikes against Iranian government infrastructure in Tehran and several provincial capitals. Concurrently, Israel's Persian-language psychological operations wing issued a chilling directive via social media, warning Iranian civilians to vacate all rail transport systems. Your presence on trains and near railway tracks will endanger your lives, the military posted on X. This directive signals a shift in targeting priority toward Iran's domestic logistics and supply chain networks. Despite the kinetic intensity, a narrow window of mediation remains open in Islamabad. Iran's ambassador to Pakistan, Raza Bashir Tarar, indicated that Pakistani-led mediation efforts are entering a critical and sensitive stage. However, the structural gap between the two sides remains immense. Tehran has officially rejected a US proposal, brokered by Islamabad, which demanded an immediate ceasefire and the lifting of the Hormuz blockade in exchange for peace talks within a 20-day window. In response, the Iranian government, via the IRNA news agency, issued a 10-point counter-proposal. This document demands not just a cessation of hostilities, but a comprehensive protocol for safe passage in the Strait, the total removal of all Western sanctions, and a multi-billion-dollar regional reconstruction fund. The IRGC High Command remains defiant, dismissing the US threats as delusional, while Deputy Sports Minister Alireza Rahimi has called for human chains of civilians, artists and athletes to surround power plants as a shield against the promised bombardment. The conflict has long since spilled over Iranian borders. Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Defense reported the interception of multiple ballistic missiles over its eastern province on Tuesday, with debris falling near critical Saudi Aramco energy hubs. In response to the heightened threat environment, Bahrain and the UAE have issued emergency public safety warnings, and the King Fahd Causeway, connecting Saudi Arabia to Bahrain, was temporarily shuttered. The human cost, as reported by the Harana Human Rights Group, has reached catastrophic levels. Since the outbreak of hostilities on February 28, 2026, the death toll includes 3,546 in Iran and nearly 1,500 in Lebanon. The US military has confirmed 13 fatalities, but narrowly avoided a political disaster on Friday when a specialized commando unit successfully rescued a weapons systems officer from a downed F-15E deep within Iranian territory. From a realist perspective, we are witnessing the final collapse of the post-1979 deterrence framework. For decades, the shadow war between the US-Israeli axis and Iran was governed by unspoken rules of proportional response and plausible deniability. Those rules have been incinerated. The Trump administration has calculated that the Iranian problem cannot be solved through regional containment or economic strangulation alone. By threatening the total destruction of the Iranian electrical grid and transportation network, Washington is attempting a strategic reset, a move to force Tehran into a state of pre-industrial paralysis, where it can no longer project power through its axis of resistance. Tehran's refusal to reopen the Strait of Hormuz is a rational, albeit high stakes, application of asymmetric leverage. The strait is the only theatre where Iran possesses a global veto. By strangling 20% of the world's oil and gas supply, Tehran is banking on the fact that global inflationary pressure will eventually force the international community to restrain Washington. However, this calculation assumes a level of economic sensitivity in the White House that may no longer exist. President Trump appears willing to trade short-term global economic pain for the long-term removal of the Iranian strategic threat. This is a gamble that the US economy can absorb $150 oil more effectively than the Iranian regime can survive a total loss of power and mobility. Israel's warning to avoid railways is a masterclass in psychological warfare and strategic preparation. In a country with Iran's geography, the rail network is the backbone of both the domestic economy and military mobilization. By telegraphing the destruction of the rail system, Israel is forcing the Iranian leadership to choose: continue the war and face a total internal collapse of food and fuel distribution, or capitulate. It is an attempt to trigger an internal social implosion before the first US heavy bombers even reach Iranian airspace. Pakistan's role as a mediator is not born of altruism, but of desperate national interest. Islamabad faces a dual nightmare: a massive refugee influx from a collapsed Iran, and the potential for the conflict to ignite sectarian tensions within its own borders. By positioning itself as the final bridge for diplomacy, Pakistan is attempting to prevent a regional conflagration that would inevitably draw in its own military resources. However, the 10-point Iranian response suggests that Tehran is not yet ready to negotiate from a position of weakness. They are demanding a return to the status quo ante, plus concessions, a position that is fundamentally incompatible with the current mood in Washington. The call for human chains around power plants by Iranian officials like Alireza Rahimi is a desperate move to exploit Western adherence to the laws of armed conflict. Trump's dismissal of war crime allegations regarding infrastructure targeting indicates that the US executive branch has decoupled military necessity from traditional civilian protection norms in this specific theatre. From a realistic standpoint, the human shield tactic only works if the attacker values international optics more than the strategic objective. In the current 2026 scenario, Washington has signalled that the objective, the permanent neutralisation of the Iranian threat, outweighs the reputational cost. The next 36 hours represent the most significant threat to the global energy supply since the 1973 oil embargo, and the most direct challenge to the Westphalian concept of state sovereignty in the 21st century. The US is no longer seeking a change in Iranian behaviour. It is seeking a change in Iranian capacity. Tehran, meanwhile, is betting that the global economy's dependence on the Persian Gulf will act as a permanent shield. This is a global report. We will continue to monitor the 0400 GMT deadline with rigorous scrutiny. As the world watches the clock tick toward midnight in Washington, the structural integrity of the Middle East hangs in the balance. Stay informed. Stay prepared.